Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. This is a requested video because my Chinese subscribers really want to understand and take a look at how I water my orchids. And I told them I use many different methods, but there are a couple fundamental underlying rules that I go by, so I thought I would make that video for them. Originally, there wasn't going to be an English version, but I thought in case this would provide value to any English-speaking orchid hobbyist, new orchid hobbyists, that is. In terms of watering, there are two tools. This is one of the tools that I use every single time, whether there's water with fertilizer or just pure water. And this is the second tool. This is an 8-ounce cup with a marking, and that marking is quarter cup. And obviously, if it's about half of that, that'll be 1/8 of a cup. So the first group of orchids are orchids that I have not repotted since I bought them. And I would use a bigger plastic cup to place them in. And to me, that's somewhat of a quarantine. But then also because it kind of works as a saucer to collect water. And for these kind of orchids, typically I give them about 1/8 of a cup in winter, and in summertime, it's about quarter cup. And for these two tiny ones, because they are all moss, so I gave them quarter cup every single time. And for my water culture orchids, because if they have roots reaching the bottom, then I would also use a very specific amount of water. For example, typically quarter cup in summertime and then 1/8 of a cup in winter. And for orchids in semi-hydro setup, if they have roots into the reservoir area, again, I will only use 1/8 of a cup. Unless I see this orchid somehow show signs of dehydration, needing more water, then I would up the amount to quarter cup. This is another semi-hydro setup. And this orchid also only receives 1/8 of a cup most of the time. And because this orchid is in a 12-ounce cup, smaller cup, so I never really quite go up to quarter cup. But I do flush all of these orchids at least, well, once a month at the end of the month. Here, what I'm showing you is if the water has fertilizer in it, make sure you don't pour it directly onto the roots because sometimes it may cause minor root burn. So as you pour the water in, just be a little careful and go around the roots. This group is my experiment group, so I call them the cup mounts. So what I usually do is I would double cup them and then tilt them to one side and just give them quarter cup of water to let them sit. And after I drain out all additional water, I will let them kind of sit up straight for a night, and then the next day I will then hang them up. And the reason for that is you much rather have the water drip into the cup during the night than hanging them up and have the water drip onto the orchids below them. And the orchid you're seeing here is the one that started the whole cup mounting thing. I was just doing experiment, but it actually responded quite well. So the other two that you saw earlier were the second and third ones that I did cup mounts with. Again, this one I tilt it so that the moss can gradually soak up all the water. And for this one and the one after, they're smaller orchids in smaller cups, and they all have holes at the bottom. So I still use the double cup method to soak these orchids in about quarter cup of amount of water. And for the one after this, I also tilt it because I want to save water. I use reverse osmosis water, and it's more costly than regular water, so I try to conserve water as much as I can. And for this category, orchids with moss in no drainage hole method, typically 1/8 of a cup is enough for a 1-week wet dry cycle to complete. Sometimes in summertime, I do have to give it more water. Actually, increase the frequency during the week. Give it another 1/8 of a cup. Again, here is just to show you minor root burn if you're not careful pouring the water with fertilizer. But otherwise, moss with no drainage hole method, 1/8 of a cup usually is a very good amount. Obviously, the more moss and the bigger your orchid, the bigger the container, you may have to, use a little bit more water. But typically, for a 16-ounce cup, 1/8 of a cup of water really is more than plenty. And for this group is more of a traditional method. That means it has holes at the bottom, except the media, the substrate, is inorganic. So they don't decompose, they don't break down over time like sphagnum moss or bark chips. So because they have roots reaching the bottom, so I still only need to provide maybe just 1/8 of a cup, sometimes 1/4 cup, depending on the season. And then I would pour the water from above and kind of wiggle around when I pour the water in, so the water kind of gets evenly distributed, but then let it sit at the bottom. But when you want to drain out the excess water after the second day or third day, just tilt it, and then there are holes to drain out the water. So this is a really good way. If you double cup it, it provides additional flexibility. And these two orchids, again, moss in net pots. Nothing too special here, but again, because I want to conserve the water, I tilt them so that I only need to give them about 1/4 cup of water, and then over time, takes about half an hour, all the moss would be moist. So that's how I deal with these two orchids. Up next, this group is slightly more controversial because I do add a 8-ounce cup at the bottom of each clay pot. And these plastic cups work as saucers to collect water, but then at the same time, because I know the amount of water that the entire, pot and media would need, typically 1/4 cup of water is all they need, and I don't even need to drain out excess water because the clay pot would eventually soak up all the water after about half a day. Up next, for orchids with longer area roots, I use the soaking method. I don't do this all the time. From time to time, maybe like once every 2 months when I feel they can use additional water, then or their area roots just look a little sad, I would then, put them into a cup carefully and just let them soak reverse osmosis water. So this is just pure water. I don't use, when I soak area roots, I just want to hydrate them. I don't need to provide fertilizer in the water because I already do that on a weekly basis into the media. And I've done this a couple of times now. Like I said, I don't do it very often. Every other week, maybe every 3 months, once every quarter. It's just something I do. I don't think it's necessary. And especially for those of you who may spray down area roots, then this soaking method really is totally not needed. But because I don't spray my orchids, I had done that in the past, but I've decided I don't want to do that anymore. So this soaking really does provide these orchids with longer area roots additional opportunity to hydrate themselves. Not that they really need it, but sometimes it's just nice to look at healthy, long, green roots with lots of moisture on them. If you are still with me right now, you're probably new to this orchid hobby because a lot of my English subscribers, they're pretty advanced. They're actually probably more expert than I am with orchids. So watering topics is probably not something they would be interested in. But anyway, if you're new to this orchid hobby, I think controlling water amount that you give to your orchid is something that you really have to learn how to do depending on your environmental conditions. Whether your environment typically would have more humidity in the air, or it gets really cold in winter time and really hot in the summertime, or how well your environment is ventilated. All of these factors may play into the amount of water that you need to give to each orchid. And obviously, how many roots and how big of a size of container they're in. All of these factors you really just have to take into consideration when deciding. And finally, if you guessed it, yes, I made this video in late winter in my time zone, in my parts of the world. So I thought I would finish this video by showing you a couple photos that I just took randomly when I decided that, hey, it was a nice warm winter with lots of lovely sunshine, that I want my additional orchids, or orchids that don't usually get that much sunlight or light exposure, to have this sunbathing session. A couple of things though, I don't do this all the time, so if you want to give your orchid a sunbathing session, try to do it in winter or gradually introduce them to more light exposure. For example, if a Phalaenopsis orchid has always getting indirect sunlight and all of a sudden you put it under a sun in summer, for example, you may have burnt leaves. But on a winter day, sunny day, a couple hours won't do any harm. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!